In spite of my strong support for free trade, I have felt compelled to oppose many of the trade agreements that have appeared in recent years. For instance, although I was not in Congress at the time, I opposed both the North American Free Trade Agreement and the World Trade Organization, both of which were heavily favored by the political establishment. Initial grounds for suspicion was the sheer length of the text of these agreements. No free trade agreement needs to be 20,000 pages long. Many, though not all supporters of the free market, supported these agreements. Very different was the situation nearly 6 decades ago when the International Trade Organization was up for debate. At that time, conservatives and libertarians agreed that supranational trade bureaucracies, with the power to infringe upon American sovereignty, were undesirable and unnecessary. Businessman Philip Courtney, a close friend of the great free market economist Ludwig von Mises, led the charge against WTO with his book, The Economic Munich. Henry Hazlitt, author of the libertarian classic Economics in One Lesson, included Courtney's book Against the WTO in the Free Man's Library, his annotated reading list of books important to the study of freedom. In 1994, Newt Gingrich, who supported the WTO, spoke with rare candor about the amount of authority the United States was transferring to a supranational organization. I am just saying that we need to be honest about the fact that we are transferring from the United States, at a practical level, significant authority to a new organization. This is a transformational moment. I would feel better if the people who favor this would be honest about the scale of change. This is not just another trade agreement. This is adopting something which twice, once in the 1940s and once in the 1950s, the U.S. Congress rejected. I'm not even saying that we should reject it. I, in fact, lean toward it. But I think we have to be very careful because it is a very big transfer of power. To establish genuine free trade, no such transfer of power is necessary. True, free trade does not require treaties or agreements between governments. On the contrary, true free trade occurs in the absence of government intervention in the free flow of goods across borders. Organizations like the WTO and NAFTA represent government-managed trade schemes, not free trade. The WTO, purported to exist to lower tariffs, is actually the agency that grants permission for tariffs to be applied when complaints of dumping are levied. Government-managed trade is inherently political, meaning that politicians and bureaucrats determine who wins and loses in the marketplace. Granting quasi-governmental international bodies the power to make decisions about American trade rules compromises American sovereignty in dangerous and unacceptable ways. Congress has changed American tax laws for the sole reason that the World Trade Organization decided that our rules unfairly impacted the European Union. I recall a congressional session in which, with hundreds of tax bills languishing in the House Ways and Means Committee, the one bill drafted strictly to satisfy the WTO was brought to the floor and passed with great urgency. In one case, the WTO sided with the Europeans against American tax law, which offered tax breaks to American companies doing business overseas. According to the European Union, the Foreign Sales Corporation program, established under President Reagan in 1984, is now an illegal subsidy, a view that a WTO appellate panel shared. The WTO's Orwellian ruling declared that allowing a company to keep more of its own money through lower taxes was a subsidy. Moreover, the program was really just compensating, and only partially at that, for unfair U.S. taxes on corporations for profits earned overseas, a disability that foreign competitors do not have to confront from their own governments. What this meant in plain English was that high-tax Europe, upset at lower-tax America, decided that the way to level the playing field was to force America to raise her taxes. Pascal Lamy, the trade czar of the European Union, actually visited with influential members of Congress in order to determine whether a new tax bill was being crafted to his satisfaction. If Mr. Laney, a member of the French Socialist Party, had been unsatisfied with the changes made to our tax code, he threatened to unleash a European trade war against U.S. imports. In effect, he was a foreign bureaucrat acting as a shadow legislator by intervening in our lawmaking process. And to no one's surprise, Congress raced to comply with the WTO ruling that American tax rules must be changed in order to bring them into harmony with international law. This outrageous affront to our national sovereignty was, of course, predictable when we joined the WTO. During congressional debates, we were assured that entry into the organization posed no threat to our sovereignty. A well-known libertarian think tank, where you might expect some skepticism of a supranational bureaucracy managing trade, offered us this rosy description. The WTO's dispute settlement mechanism helps nations resolve trade disputes without resorting to costly trade wars. The system relies on voluntary compliance and does not compromise national sovereignty. That was nonsense. A Congressional Research Service report was quite clear about the consequences of our membership. As a member of the WTO, the United States does commit to act in accordance with the rules of the multilateral body. It is legally obligated to ensure that national laws do not conflict with WTO rules. The WTO has given us the worst of both worlds. We've sacrificed national sovereignty by changing our domestic laws at the behest of an international body, yet we still face trade wars over a variety of products. If anything, the WTO makes trade relations worse by providing our foreign competitors with a collective means to attack U.S. trade interests. And let us not forget that the Constitution grants Congress, and Congress alone, the authority to regulate trade and craft tax laws. Congress cannot cede that authority to the WTO or any other international body, nor can the President legally sign any treaty that purports to do so. Our founders never intended for America to become entangled in global trade schemes, and they certainly never intended to have our domestic laws overridden by international bureaucrats.